Pregnant woman calls 911 and says, "My water is black." What paramedics discovered left them speechless. "My water broke, but it's not clear, it's black," she gasped into the phone, her voice trembling with terror. What the emergency responders found when they arrived at her home would challenge everything they thought they knew about childbirth and reveal a medical mystery, so rare that doctors are still studying her case today. If stories that defy explanation captivate you, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life mysteries. Asterisk. The 911 dispatcher stared at her computer screen, fingers frozen over the keyboard as she tried to process what she'd just heard. In 12 years of emergency dispatch, Linda Martinez had fielded calls about every conceivable pregnancy complication. But this was something entirely different, something that shouldn't be medically possible. "Ma'am, can you repeat that?" Linda asked, her professional training kicking in despite her confusion. "You said your amniotic fluid is ... Jessica Chun's panicked voice came through the line again, more urgent this time. "Yes, completely. Black. I'm a lab technician. I know what normal amniotic fluid looks like. This isn't normal. Something is very, very wrong." Asterisk. Emiaj Rodriguez threw the ambulance into gear while his partner Patterson checked their equipment one more time. In 20 years of emergency response, Rodriguez had heard dispatch send them on some unusual calls, but this one had them both scratching their heads. "Black amniotic fluid," Patterson muttered, reviewing their obstetric protocols on his tablet. "I've never even heard of that as a possibility. You think she's confused? Maybe blood mixed with normal fluid?" Rodriguez shook his head as they navigated through late-night traffic. Dispatcher said the woman identified herself as a lab tech. If anyone would know the difference between blood and amniotic fluid, it'd be someone with medical training. They pulled into the driveway of a modest 2-story house in Riverside's suburban district. David Chun stood outside under the porch light, still wearing his pajamas, frantically waving them toward the front door. "Thank God you're here," David called out, his voice cracking with panic. "She's upstairs. I've never seen anything like this before." Rodriguez and Patterson grabbed their gear and followed David up the carpeted stairs, the sound of Jessica's labored breathing growing louder with each step. They entered the master bedroom and immediately stopped short. Jessica Chun lay on the bed, her face pale with pain and fear, but it was the sheets beneath her that made both seasoned paramedics freeze in place. Dark, almost ink-black stains covered the white bedding, and the smell in the room was unlike anything they'd encountered in hundreds of deliveries. "Ma'am, I'm Rodriguez. This is Patterson," the lead EMT said, quickly regaining his composure and moving toward Jessica. "We're here to help you." Jessica looked up at them with desperate eyes. "You can see it, right? It's really black?" "I'm not losing my mind?" Patterson knelt beside the bed, his medical training overriding his shock. "No, ma'am, you're not losing your mind. We can definitely see what you're describing." He exchanged a meaningful glance with Rodriguez. In their combined 40 years of emergency medicine, neither had ever encountered anything remotely like this. The textbooks didn't have a chapter on black amniotic fluid because it simply wasn't supposed to exist. "We need to get you to the hospital immediately," Rodriguez said, already radioing dispatch for priority transport clearance. "Have you experienced any unusual symptoms recently? Any exposure to chemicals or medications?" Jessica shook her head, another wave of pain washing over her face. Nothing different. Normal pregnancy until tonight. As they prepared her for transport, both paramedics couldn't shake the feeling that they were dealing with something far beyond their training and experience. Asterisk. Rodriguez's hands moved automatically through the familiar routine of checking Jessica's vital signs, but his mind was racing to find any explanation for what he was witnessing. Blood pressure elevated, but not dangerously so. Pulse rapid but consistent with active labor. Temperature normal. Everything suggested a routine delivery except for the impossible evidence soaking the sheets beneath her. "Patterson, get me a sample of that fluid," Rodriguez said quietly, pulling out a sterile container. "Hospital's going to want to analyze this immediately." Jessica grabbed his arm as another contraction hit. "Is my baby going to be okay? What does this mean?" Rodriguez had learned long ago that honesty tempered with reassurance was the best approach in emergency situations. "I won't lie to you, Mrs. Chun, this is something we've never encountered before. But your vital signs are stable, and we're getting you to the best doctors in the city." Patterson was on the radio with Riverside Medical Center's emergency department, his voice tense as he described the situation. "Dr. Kim, I know this sounds impossible, but we have a 38-week pregnant female with what appears to be black amniotic fluid." "No, sir, not dark or blood-tinged completely black." The radio crackled with Dr. Sarah Kim's skeptical response. "Patterson, are you certain about what you're seeing? Amniotic fluid cannot be black. It's physiologically impossible." "Copy that, doctor, but we're looking at it right now." Patient is a lab technician who identified the abnormality herself. "We need obstetrics standing by." As they loaded Jessica onto the stretcher, Rodriguez noticed that the fluid continued to leak, maintaining its dark, unnatural color. The smell was becoming more pronounced, too metallic and chemical, nothing like the normal scent associated with birth. "David, ride with us," Patterson called to Jessica's husband as they secured the gurney in the ambulance. "She's going to need you there?" During the transport, Jessica's contractions intensified, but what worried Rodriguez more was the way the baby's heart rate was beginning to fluctuate on the monitor. Whatever was causing the black discoloration might be affecting the infant as well. "ETA 3 minutes, Patterson radioed ahead. "Patient's contractions are now 2 minutes apart. Fetal heart rate showing some irregularities." Jessica looked up at Rodriguez with eyes full of terror. "This can't be normal. In all my years working in medical labs, I've never seen or heard of anything like this. What if something's wrong with my baby?" Rodriguez squeezed her hand reassuringly, though privately he shared her fears. "The doctors at Riverside are the best in the state. They'll figure out what's happening and take care of both of you." But as the hospital came into view, Rodriguez couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to present the emergency department with a medical mystery that would challenge everything the doctors thought they knew about pregnancy and childbirth. The ambulance bay doors of Riverside Medical Center slid open as Rodriguez and Patterson rushed Jessica's gurney through the emergency entrance. Dr. Sarah Kim stood waiting, her expression skeptical, until she caught sight of the dark stains on Jessica's clothing and the stretcher linens. "Dear God," she whispered, her medical training warring with the evidence before her eyes. Jessica was immediately wheeled into Trauma Bay 3, where a full obstetric team had assembled. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the hospital's leading maternal-fetal medicine specialist, arrived within minutes, having been pulled from her home by the unprecedented nature of the case. "Mrs. Chun, I'm Dr. Vasquez," she said, quickly washing her hands while assessing Jessica's condition. "I understand you work in medical laboratory sciences. Can you tell me exactly what you observed?" Jessica struggled to speak between contractions. "The fluid that leaked when my water broke, it was completely black. Not dark brown, not blood-tinged, but black like ink. I've processed thousands of amniotic fluid samples in my career. This is impossible, but it's happening." Dr. Vasquez exchanged glances with Dr. Kim as they began their examination. The fetal monitor showed concerning heart rate patterns, and Jessica's own vital signs were beginning to show signs of distress. "Get me a complete blood panel, liver function tests, kidney function, and toxicology screening," Dr. Vasquez ordered. "Also, I want that amniotic fluid sample analyzed immediately, full spectrum analysis, including heavy metals and environmental toxins." David paced in the corner of the trauma bay, his face pale with worry. "Doctor, Is our baby going to be okay? Jessica's been perfectly healthy this entire pregnancy. We don't understand what's happening. Dr. Kim drew David aside while the nurses worked to get Jessica comfortable and connected to monitoring equipment. Mr. Chun, we're going to run every test possible to determine what's causing this unusual presentation. Has your wife been exposed to any chemicals, medications, or environmental hazards recently? Nothing out of the ordinary, David replied. She works at Meridian Environmental Labs, but she's always careful about safety protocols. She's been working some extra shifts lately because they're short-staffed, but nothing dangerous. Dr. Vasquez overheard the conversation and approached David with renewed interest. Environmental labs? What type of testing does her facility perform? Water quality, soil contamination, industrial waste analysis, that sort of thing, David explained. But Jessica works in the clean labs, processing samples, not handling raw industrial materials. The first test results began coming back within the hour, and Dr. Vasquez's expression grew increasingly concerned as she reviewed them. Jessica's blood showed elevated levels of several heavy metals, and her kidney function was beginning to decline. Mrs. Chun, Dr. Vasquez said gently, sitting beside Jessica's bed, your blood work is showing some concerning findings. It appears you may have been exposed to environmental toxins, possibly at your workplace. We need to discuss immediate treatment options. Jessica's face went white. Are you saying I've been poisoned? Dr. Vasquez's words hung heavy in the trauma bay as the full implications of Jessica's condition began to sink in. The hospital's chief of obstetrics had been called in, along with the head of toxicology and a neonatologist, to assess potential risks to the baby. The preliminary blood analysis shows elevated levels of cadmium, mercury, and several industrial compounds that shouldn't be present in human blood, Dr. Kim explained, reviewing the lab results with growing alarm. Your kidney function is declining, which suggests systemic poisoning. Jessica felt the room spinning as another contraction gripped her, but I'm always careful with safety protocols. I wear gloves, use the fume hoods, follow every procedure exactly. Dr. Elena Vasquez had seen cases of occupational exposure before, but never during pregnancy, and never with these specific compounds. Environmental contamination can happen through ventilation systems, contaminated surfaces, or improper waste disposal. Sometimes workers are exposed without realizing it. David moved closer to Jessica's bedside, his face etched with worry and anger. Are you telling us that Jessica's workplace poisoned her? And our baby? We need to focus on treatment right now, Dr. Vasquez said diplomatically, though privately she was already thinking about the legal and regulatory implications of what they were discovering. The challenge is that many standard detoxification treatments can't be used during pregnancy. The fetal monitor began alarming, drawing everyone's attention to the concerning heart rate patterns. Jessica's baby was showing signs of significant distress, the rhythmic beeping becoming increasingly erratic. The toxins are affecting the baby too, the neonatologist observed grimly. Depending on the level of exposure and how long it's been occurring, we could be looking at serious developmental complications. Jessica grabbed Dr. Vasquez's hand, tears streaming down her face. Can you save my baby? Please, tell me you can. Save my baby. We're going to do everything possible, Dr. Vasquez promised, though the uncertainty in her voice was unmistakable. But we may need to consider early delivery if the baby's condition continues to deteriorate. The trauma bay had become a hub of intense medical activity. Nurses drew blood for additional testing. Specialists consulted in hushed tones, and David stood helplessly watching as his wife and unborn child fought against an invisible enemy that had been slowly poisoning them for weeks or possibly months. I want to call the EPA, Dr. Kim said quietly to Dr. Vasquez. If an environmental laboratory is exposing workers to this level of toxic contamination, other people could be at risk. Jessica overheard and looked up with a mixture of fear and determination. My coworkers, she whispered. Some of them have been having health problems too. We thought it was just stress from the heavy workload. The pieces of a much larger puzzle were beginning to fall into place, revealing what appeared to be not just a medical emergency, but potentially a criminal case of environmental negligence. Dr. Vasquez pulled up a chair beside Jessica's bed, tablet in hand, ready to conduct the most thorough medical history of her career. The urgency of Jessica's condition demanded they uncover every possible source of the toxic exposure that was threatening both mother and child. Jessica, I need you to walk me through your typical workday at Meridian Labs, Dr. Vasquez began. Every detail could be important. Despite her pain, Jessica focused on the questions. I usually arrive at 6 a.m. for the early shift. I process water and soil samples in Lab C, which is supposed to be the cleanest facility. I wear protective equipment, but lately... She paused, remembering something. Lately, the ventilation system has been making strange noises. David leaned forward. She's been working double shifts for the past 2 months. Her supervisor said they were behind on a major contract. What type of samples have you been processing recently? Dr. Vasquez asked. Mostly routine environmental monitoring, but there have been some unusual samples, Jessica admitted. Industrial, site remediation samples from old factory locations. My supervisor, Mr. Harrison, said they were priority contracts and needed expedited processing. Dr. Kim joined the conversation, having just received additional lab results. Jessica, your blood shows presence of compounds that are typically found in electronic waste and heavy industrial contamination. These aren't substances you'd normally encounter in routine environmental testing. Jessica's face went pale. About 6 weeks ago, we started getting samples that looked different, darker, with unusual odors. Mr. Harrison told us they were from legacy contamination sites and to process them using standard protocols. Did anyone else report health issues? Dr. Vasquez asked. Sarah Martinez in Lab B has been having severe headaches and nausea. Tom Wilson collapsed last week. They said it was exhaustion. And Linda. Jessica's voice trailed off as she realized the implications. Linda Kumar had a miscarriage 3 weeks ago. She was only 12 weeks pregnant. The room fell silent as the medical team absorbed this information. Dr. Kim was already reaching for her phone to contact hospital administration about reporting requirements for occupational health emergencies. Jessica, I'm going to contact the State Health Department and the EPA, Dr. Vasquez said. This appears to be systematic workplace exposure that's affected multiple employees. Another strong contraction gripped Jessica, and the fetal monitor showed the baby's heart rate dropping dangerously low. Dr. Vasquez checked Jessica's cervix, and her expression grew grave. Jessica, you're progressing rapidly, but the baby is showing severe distress. We need to make a decision about delivery soon. David gripped Jessica's hand. What does that mean exactly? It means your baby may not survive much longer in this environment, Dr. Vasquez explained gently. The toxic exposure is affecting the placenta's ability to provide oxygen and nutrients. We may need to perform an emergency C-section. Jessica closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. Do whatever you have to do to save my baby, whatever it takes. The weight of the decision hung heavy in the room as the medical team prepared for what could be a life-or-death race against the poison coursing through Jessica's system. While Jessica fought for her life in the trauma bay, the laboratory results from her amniotic fluid sample were revealing a contamination profile that defied medical explanation. Dr. Patricia Wong, the hospital's chief of toxicology, stared at her computer screen in disbelief as the spectral analysis completed. This is impossible, she muttered, running the test a second time to confirm the results. The fluid contained not just heavy metals, but a cocktail of industrial compounds including PCBs, dioxins, and rare earth elements typically found only In electronic manufacturing, waste. Dr. Wong immediately called Dr. Vasquez. Elena, you need to see these results immediately. This patient hasn't just been exposed to contamination. She's been systematically poisoned with industrial waste. Meanwhile, Jessica's condition was deteriorating rapidly. Her kidney function had declined further, and the baby's heart rate was showing ominous patterns of severe distress. Dr. Vasquez made the critical decision to prepare for emergency delivery. We can't wait any longer, she told David as surgical teams assembled. Both Jessica and the baby are in immediate danger, but as they prepared for surgery, David revealed information that changed everything. Jessica mentioned something last week about her lab receiving samples that weren't properly labeled. She said her supervisor was pressuring everyone to process them quickly without following normal documentation procedures. Dr. Kim paused in her surgical preparations. What kind of samples? She said they looked like industrial sludge, not normal environmental samples. Black, oily substances that smelled chemical. Mr. Harrison told the staff they were from priority cleanup sites. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to form a horrifying picture. Dr. Wong's voice came over the intercom with urgency. Elena, I've contacted the EPA emergency response team. Based on these contamination levels, we're looking at criminal environmental violations. Jessica stirred on the operating table, fighting through her pain to speak. The samples? We weren't supposed to test them in the clean lab. Harrison said the regular hazmat protocols were too time-consuming. He said corporate needed fast turnaround times. Dr. Vasquez felt a chill run down her spine. Jessica, are you saying you were processing hazardous waste without proper safety protocols? I think Harrison was taking illegal disposal contracts, making money by accepting waste that should have gone to specialized facilities. Jessica's voice was weak but determined. We thought we were testing contaminated soil, but I think we were handling raw industrial waste. The implications hit everyone in the room simultaneously. Meridian Environmental Labs wasn't just cutting corners on safety. They were operating an illegal waste disposal scheme, using their legitimate testing facility as cover for criminal environmental violations. Dr. Kim looked at David with grave concern. If Jessica has been handling concentrated industrial waste for weeks without proper protection, the level of toxic exposure could be lethal. As if summoned by their conversation, Jessica's monitors began alarming. Her blood pressure was spiking, and the baby's heart rate had dropped to dangerous levels. We're losing them both, Dr. Vasquez announced, rushing toward the operating room. Emergency C-section now. The race to save Jessica and her baby had become a race against a criminal conspiracy that had turned a medical laboratory into a toxic death trap. The operating room erupted into controlled chaos as Jessica's condition reached critical levels. Her body was going into toxic shock, and the baby's heart rate had become dangerously irregular. Dr. Vasquez worked with precision born from years of high-risk deliveries, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for delivering a baby poisoned. In utero, BP dropping fast, the anesthesiologist called out. She's going into renal failure. Baby's heart rate under 60, added the neonatal specialist. We need this delivery now. Dr. Vasquez made the incision with steady hands, but as soon as she reached the amniotic sac, the entire surgical team recoiled. The fluid that poured out was indeed black, with an acrid chemical smell that penetrated their surgical masks. Full respiratory protection now, Dr. Vasquez ordered. This fluid is contaminated with industrial toxins. The baby emerged silent and frighteningly still, her tiny body bearing a grayish pallor that spoke to months of toxic exposure. The neonatal team immediately began resuscitation efforts, while Dr. Vasquez worked to control Jessica's hemorrhaging. Come on, little one, whispered Dr. Sarah Chun, the neonatologist, as she performed CPR on the infant. Fight for us. After what felt like an eternity, A weak cry filled the operating room. Baby Emma Chun had survived her toxic wound, but the real fight for her life was just beginning. "Get her to NICU immediately," Dr. Chun ordered. "Full toxicology, panel, and supportive care. We don't know what these chemicals have done to her developing organs." Meanwhile, Jessica's condition remained critical. Her kidneys were shutting down, and her liver showed signs of severe damage from the prolonged toxic exposure. Dr. Vasquez knew they needed to begin immediate chelation, therapy to remove the heavy metals from her system, but the treatment itself carried risks. David was allowed into the recovery room where Jessica lay unconscious, surrounded by machines monitoring her failing organs. "Is she going to be okay?" he asked Dr. Vasquez, though her expression already suggested the answer. "The next 48 hours are critical," Dr. Vasquez replied honestly. "The toxins have caused significant organ damage. We're starting chelation therapy to remove the heavy metals, but her kidneys and liver have been severely compromised." In the NICU, baby Emma fought for every breath. The toxins had affected her lung development, and her neurological responses were concerning. Dr. Chun worked around the clock, consulting with pediatric toxicologists across the country, but there was little precedent for treating a newborn with this level of industrial poisoning. "The good news is that she's responding to treatment," Dr. Chun told David during one of his visits between Jessica's bedside and the NICU. "Babies are remarkably resilient. But we won't know the full extent of any developmental damage for months, or even years." As Jessica's story spread through the hospital, it reached the ears of Dr. Michael Rodriguez, an environmental health specialist who had been investigating unusual patterns of illness in industrial workers. He immediately recognized the significance of Jessica's case and contacted federal authorities. "This isn't just medical malpractice," he told the FBI agent who responded to his call. "This is criminal environmental poisoning on a scale that could affect hundreds of workers and their families." Within hours, federal agents were preparing search warrants for Meridian Environmental Labs, while Jessica and Emma continued their fight for survival against an enemy that had been slowly killing them for months. Dr. Vasquez had performed thousands of deliveries, but the emergency C-section to save Jessica and Emma Chun would haunt her for years to come. The operating room had been transformed into a hazmat environment, with surgical staff wearing enhanced respiratory protection against the toxic amniotic fluid that defied every principle of human biology. "Scalpel," Dr. Vasquez called out, her voice muffled by the specialized mask. As she made the initial incision, the smell that escaped was unlike anything she'd encountered in 15 years of obstetric surgery. Metallic, chemical, and utterly wrong. The surgical team worked in eerie silence, broken only by the steady beeping of monitors and the occasional whispered instruction. When Dr. Vasquez reached the uterus, she paused for a moment, steeling herself for what she might find. "Ready for delivery," she announced, though nothing could have prepared them for the sight of baby Emma emerging from her toxic environment. The infant was small, weighing barely 4 pounds, and her skin had an unnatural grayish tint that spoke to months of chemical exposure. But she was alive, and as Dr. Chun began resuscitation efforts, Emma's weak cry filled the operating room with hope. "She's breathing on her own," Dr. Chun announced with relief. "Heart rate stabilizing at 110. Getting her to NICU now." As the neonatal team rushed Emma to intensive care, Dr. Vasquez focused on Jessica, whose body was fighting a battle against systemic poisoning. Her blood pressure remained dangerously low, and her kidneys were producing almost no urine, a sign of impending organ failure. "Start her on emergency dialysis," Dr. Vasquez ordered. "We need to get these toxins out of her system immediately." The recovery room became a hub of intensive medical activity as specialists from multiple departments worked to save Jessica's life. Dr. Wong arrived with the final toxicology results, her face grave as she reviewed the comprehensive analysis. "The Contamination levels are off the charts, she reported to Dr. Vasquez. Heavy metals, industrial solvents, electronic waste compounds. It's like she's been swimming in a toxic waste dump. David sat beside Jessica's bed, holding her hand as machines breathed for her and filtered her blood. The woman who had left for work that morning, excited about their impending parenthood, was now fighting for her life against an invisible enemy. FBI wants to interview Jessica when she's stable enough, Dr. Vasquez told David quietly. They believe this is part of a criminal investigation into illegal waste disposal. Will she be okay? David asked, though he could see the uncertainty in the doctor's eyes. The next 72 hours will tell us everything, Dr. Vasquez replied. Her body is young and strong, but the level of toxic exposure is unprecedented. In the NICU, Emma continued to surprise the medical staff with her resilience. Despite her traumatic birth and toxic exposure, she was breathing independently and showing neurological responses that gave Dr. Chun cautious optimism. She's a fighter, Dr. Chun told David during one of his visits. The next few weeks will be critical for assessing any long-term effects. But right now, she's defying all our expectations. As federal agents prepared to raid Meridian Environmental Labs, Jessica and Emma's story was becoming a rallying cry for environmental justice and corporate accountability. 70-2 hours after Emma's dramatic birth, Jessica finally opened her eyes in the intensive care unit. The first thing she saw was David's exhausted face, etched with worry lines that seemed to have appeared overnight. The baby, she whispered, her voice hoarse from the ventilator that had been breathing for her. Is she alive? David's face broke into the first smile he'd managed in days. She's alive, Jess. She's small, but she's fighting like her mother. Dr. Vasquez appeared at Jessica's bedside, her expression cautiously optimistic. Jessica, you've been through hell, but your body is responding to treatment. Your kidney function is improving, and the chelation therapy is successfully removing the heavy metals from your system. Jessica tried to sit up, but felt weak and dizzy. I want to see her. I want to see Emma. Soon, Dr. Vasquez promised. But first, there are some people who need to speak with you about what happened at Meridian Labs. The FBI agents who entered Jessica's room were gentle but thorough in their questioning. Agent Sarah Morrison had been investigating environmental crimes for 8 years, but the scope of what Jessica described at Meridian Labs shocked even her experienced perspective. You're telling us that your supervisor knowingly had you process hazardous waste without proper safety protocols? Agent Morrison asked, taking detailed notes. Jessica nodded weakly. Harrison said the regular hazmat procedures were too expensive and time-consuming. He told us corporate needed faster turnaround times to stay competitive. How long has this been going on? At least 6 months, maybe longer. But it got much worse about 2 months ago, when we started getting these black, oily samples that smelled like chemicals. Agent Morrison exchanged glances with her partner. Jessica, we raided Meridian Labs yesterday. What we found there is going to result in federal criminal charges. Meanwhile, in the NICU, baby Emma continued to defy medical expectations. Despite being born with toxic levels of industrial chemicals in her system, she was gaining weight and showing normal neurological development. Dr. Chun had consulted with pediatric toxicologists across the country, but Emma's case was unprecedented. She weighs 4 pounds, 8 ounces today, Dr. Chun told David during his daily visit. Her lungs are getting stronger, and her blood work shows the toxin levels are decreasing. David stared through the incubator window at his daughter, so tiny, but so determined to live. Will there be long-term effects? We're monitoring everything: brain development, organ function, neurological responses. So far, she's exceeding all our expectations, but we'll need to follow her development closely for years. That afternoon, Jessica was finally strong enough to be wheeled to the NICU to meet her daughter. The moment she saw Emma through the incubator window, tears streamed down her face. "She's beautiful," Jessica whispered, reaching through the ports to touch Emma's tiny hand. "I'm so sorry, baby girl. Mommy didn't know she was hurting you." Dr. Vasquez stood beside them, watching the reunion with mixed emotions. "Jessica, you both survived something that should have been fatal. Emma is alive because you recognized something was wrong and sought help immediately." As news of Jessica's case spread through the medical community and media, it became clear that her nightmare was far from over. The fight for justice was just beginning, and the implications of what had happened at Meridian Labs would reverberate for years to come. The FBI raid on Meridian Environmental Labs revealed a criminal operation that exceeded even Agent Morrison's worst expectations. Hidden in the facility's basement, federal agents discovered a makeshift disposal operation where drums of toxic waste were being processed through the laboratory's legitimate testing equipment. "It's a full-scale illegal dumping operation," Agent Morrison explained to Jessica and David during a follow-up interview. They were accepting hazardous waste from electronics manufacturers, chemical plants, and industrial facilities, then running it through your lab to make it look like legitimate environmental testing. Jessica felt sick as the full scope of the deception became clear. "So when Harrison told us we were testing contaminated soil samples, we were actually handling raw industrial waste?" "Exactly. And the exposure levels you and your coworkers experienced were hundreds of times higher than what safety protocols allow." The revelation that other Meridian employees had been poisoned sparked a broader investigation. Linda Kumar, whose miscarriage had seemed like a tragic coincidence, came forward with her story. Sarah Martinez's chronic headaches and nausea suddenly made sense in the context of toxic exposure. "How many people were affected?" David asked, holding Jessica's hand as she processed the magnitude of the conspiracy. Agent Morrison consulted her notes. "We've identified at least 12 employees who show signs of heavy metal poisoning. 3 pregnant women, including Jessica, were directly exposed. Linda lost her baby, and another woman named Carmen Rodriguez is currently hospitalized with kidney failure." The corporate executives at Meridian had been arrested on federal charges, including criminal conspiracy, environmental crimes, and reckless endangerment. CEO Robert Meridian and plant supervisor James Harrison faced potential decades in prison if convicted. They made millions of dollars accepting illegal waste disposal contracts, Agent Morrison continued. The companies paying them thought the waste was being properly processed at a legitimate environmental facility. Jessica struggled with feelings of guilt and anger as she learned more about the operation. "I should have known something was wrong. The samples looked different, smelled different. I should have spoken up." "Jessica, you were manipulated by criminals who deliberately deceived you," Dr. Vasquez interjected. "You trusted your employer to maintain safety standards. That trust was betrayed in the worst possible way." The Environmental Protection Agency had declared Meridian Labs a Superfund site, requiring millions of dollars in cleanup costs. The contamination had spread beyond the facility itself, affecting groundwater and soil in the surrounding area. Entire neighborhoods may need to be evacuated, EPA Administrator Dr. Patricia Wells explained during a press conference. "The level of contamination we've discovered poses ongoing health risks to anyone in the vicinity." As news of the scandal broke nationally, Jessica found herself at the center of a media storm. Reporters wanted to interview the woman whose black amniotic fluid had exposed one of the largest environmental crimes in state history. "I don't want to be famous for this," Jessica told David as they watched news coverage from her hospital bed. "I just want Emma to be healthy and for this never to happen to another family." But Jessica's story was already inspiring action. Environmental groups were calling for stricter oversight of industrial waste disposal, and legislators were drafting new laws to protect workers from toxic exposure. "Your nightmare is becoming other people's protection," David said, squeezing her hand. "Emma's going to grow up knowing her mother helped change the world. Asterisk, the legal machinery of justice moved swiftly once the scope of Meridian Labs' criminal operation became clear. Federal prosecutors filed a comprehensive indictment charging company executives with conspiracy, environmental crimes, reckless endangerment, and fraud. The case would become a landmark prosecution in environmental criminal law. District Attorney Michael Richardson had prosecuted environmental crimes for 15 years. But the Meridian case represented something unprecedented. We're looking at systematic poisoning of workers and communities. He explained to Jessica during a victim impact preparation session. Your testimony will be crucial to securing convictions. Jessica had been discharged from the hospital, but required ongoing medical monitoring. The chelation therapy had successfully reduced the heavy metal levels in her blood, but doctors warned that some effects might not manifest for years. Her kidneys showed signs of permanent damage, and her liver function remained compromised. I want to testify, Jessica told Richardson firmly. If speaking up prevents this from happening to other families, then I'll do whatever it takes. The civil lawsuits began almost immediately. Attorney Sandra Lopez, who specialized in environmental tort cases, had contacted Jessica about representing the affected workers in a class action lawsuit against Meridian Corporation. The company has assets worth approximately $50 million, Lopez explained. But the real accountability will come from the insurance companies and parent corporations that profited from this operation. Emma, now 3 weeks old, continued to thrive despite her traumatic beginning. Her weight had increased to 5 pounds, and her neurological development appeared normal. Dr. Chun remained cautiously optimistic, but warned that some effects of prenatal toxic exposure might not become apparent until later in childhood. She's exceeded every expectation, Dr. Chun told Jessica during one of Emma's checkups. Her blood work shows the toxin levels are almost undetectable now. Whatever long-term effects there might be, she's giving herself the best possible chance. The EPA's investigation had expanded beyond Meridian Labs to examine the entire network of companies that had been illegally disposing of waste through the facility. Chemical manufacturers, electronics companies, and industrial facilities across 3 states were under investigation for their role in the conspiracy. This wasn't just one corrupt company, EPA Administrator Wells explained to Congress during televised hearings. This was a systematic abuse of environmental regulations that put thousands of people at risk. The environmental cleanup at the Meridian site was expected to take years and cost taxpayers millions of dollars. Groundwater contamination had spread to residential areas, forcing the evacuation of 47 families from homes near the facility. These families lost everything because of corporate greed, said community activist Maria Santos during a protest outside the courthouse. They trusted that the companies in their neighborhood were following the law. Jessica watched the protests and congressional hearings from her home, Emma sleeping peacefully in her arms. The contrast between her daughter's innocent face and the massive criminal conspiracy that had nearly killed them both was almost surreal. Sometimes I can't believe this is our life now, she told David as they watched news coverage of the case. 3 months ago, I was just a lab technician processing samples. Now we're at the center of a federal criminal case. David had taken leave from his job to care for Jessica and Emma, but the stress of the situation was taking its toll on both of them. The medical bills were mounting despite insurance coverage, and the ongoing legal proceedings required constant attention. We're going to get through this, David said, though his voice carried the weight of uncertainty. Emma's healthy, you're getting stronger, and justice is finally being served. 6 months after Emma's dramatic birth, Jessica stood before a federal judge to deliver her victim impact statement. The courtroom was packed with other affected workers, their families, and environmental advocates who had rallied around the case. Your Honor, Jessica began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. When I called 911 that night and said my amniotic fluid was black, I thought I was losing my mind. I never imagined I was uncovering one of the largest environmental crimes in our state's history. Robert Meridian and James Harrison sat at the defendant's table, their expensive suits and legal team a stark contrast to the working families they had poisoned. Jessica looked directly at them as she continued her testimony. These men stole more than my health and my daughter's safety. They stole my trust in the workplace, my belief that employers care about worker safety, and my faith that the environment my child grows up in is protected by law. Emma, now 6 months old and thriving, sat in David's arms in the gallery. Her presence served as a powerful reminder of what was at stake in the case. The medical evidence presented during the trial had been overwhelming. Dr. Vasquez testified about the unprecedented nature of Jessica's condition, while Dr. Wong detailed the toxic cocktail found in Jessica's blood and amniotic fluid. In 30 years of toxicology, Dr. Wong had testified, I have never seen contamination levels this severe in a living patient. The fact that both mother and child survived is nothing short of miraculous. A prosecution had presented evidence showing that Meridian executives knew about the illegal dumping operation and actively concealed it from employees and regulators. Internal emails revealed discussions about cost savings from bypassing proper disposal procedures. They called us expendable, testified Carmen Rodriguez, who had suffered kidney failure from the toxic exposure. They calculated that paying fines would be cheaper than following safety regulations. The defense had attempted to argue that the executives were unaware of the safety violations, but the evidence was too overwhelming. Financial records showed millions of dollars in illegal waste disposal contracts, and security footage captured executives personally overseeing the basement dumping operation. Judge Patricia Williams had presided over environmental cases for 20 years, but she called the Meridian case one of the most egregious examples of corporate environmental crime she had ever encountered. The defendants' actions endangered not just their employees, but entire communities, Judge Williams said during sentencing. Their pursuit of profit at the expense of human health and environmental safety demands the strongest possible response. Robert Meridian received 18 years in federal prison, while James Harrison was sentenced to 12 years. The company was ordered to pay $45 million in restitution to victims and cleanup costs. No amount of money can give me back my health or guarantee my daughter's future, Jessica said after the sentencing. But this sentence sends a message that environmental crimes have consequences. The civil lawsuit settlement provided financial compensation for medical expenses and ongoing health monitoring, but Jessica knew the real victory was in the precedent the case had set. Other companies will think twice before putting profits ahead of worker safety, attorney Sandra Lopez told reporters. Jessica's courage in speaking up has probably saved countless lives. As the family left the courthouse, Jessica reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. The woman who had been afraid to question unusual samples at work had become a national advocate for environmental justice. Asterisk. Jessica's transformation from victim to advocate began with a phone call from Dr. Rachel Green, director of the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. The agency wanted Jessica to consult on new workplace safety protocols for environmental laboratories. Your case exposed gaps in our regulatory system that we never knew existed, Dr. Green explained. During their meeting, we need your perspective to ensure this never happens to another worker. Emma, now 8 months old, had become a symbol of resilience in the environmental health community. Her remarkable recovery from prenatal toxic exposure had surprised medical experts and inspired research into childhood resilience following chemical contamination. She's developing normally in every measurable way, Dr. Chun reported during Emma's latest checkup. Her neurological responses, physical development, and cognitive milestones are all within normal ranges. Jessica had enrolled in evening classes, to become a certified environmental health specialist, driven by her experience to help protect other workers from toxic exposure. The irony wasn't lost on her that the industry that had nearly killed her was now becoming her life's mission. I want to be the person who speaks up when something doesn't look right, Jessica told her instructor during a lab safety course. I want to be the voice that other workers can trust. David had returned to work, but remained deeply involved in the environmental advocacy movement that had grown around their case. He had joined the board of directors for Clean Water Alliance, using his engineering background to help communities identify potential contamination sources. Jessica's courage changed all of us, said Maria Santos, a community activist who had organized protests during the trial. She showed us that one person speaking up can expose corruption that affects thousands of people. The Meridian case had led to sweeping changes in environmental regulations. Congress passed the Worker Environmental Protection Act, requiring enhanced safety monitoring and whistleblower protections for employees who report environmental violations. We call it Emma's Law, explained Congresswoman Patricia Liu, who had sponsored the legislation. Because Emma's mother had the courage to call 911 when something wasn't right, other families will be protected from similar tragedies. Jessica's speaking engagements at medical conferences and environmental summits had made her a recognized expert on workplace toxic exposure. Her unique perspective as both a laboratory professional and a victim gave her credibility with both medical professionals and policymakers. I never want to be famous, Jessica reflected during an interview with Environmental Health Journal. But if my story prevents other families from going through what we experienced, then the trauma was worth something. The cleanup at the former Meridian Lab site had taken 2 years and cost $40 million in taxpayer funds. The facility had been demolished, and the land was being converted into a community health center specializing in environmental medicine. It's poetic justice, David observed as they attended the groundbreaking ceremony for the new facility. The place that poisoned so many people will now be dedicated to healing and prevention. Emma took her first steps in the auditorium, where Jessica was delivering a keynote speech about environmental justice. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. The child who had survived toxic contamination in the womb was now walking into a future made safer by her mother's advocacy. She'll grow up in a world where workplace safety means something, Jessica said, watching Emma toddle across the stage. That's the real victory. 3 years after the Meridian Lab scandal, Jessica found herself testifying before Congress again, this time as an expert witness supporting new federal legislation on environmental health monitoring. Emma, now a precocious 3-year-old, played quietly with toys in the witness gallery as her mother addressed lawmakers. The Worker Environmental Protection Act has saved lives, Jessica testified, but we need stronger enforcement mechanisms and better funding for workplace safety inspections. The legislation she was supporting would establish a national database for tracking occupational toxic exposures and require annual health screenings for workers in high-risk industries. It was a direct result of research inspired by the Meridian case. Jessica's own health had stabilized, though she continued to require regular monitoring for kidney function and liver damage. The chelation therapy had been successful, but doctors warned that some effects of heavy metal poisoning might not manifest for decades. I'm essentially a living case study, Jessica joked to David as they prepared for another round of medical tests. At least my suffering is contributing to medical knowledge. Emma's development continued to exceed all expectations. Pediatric toxicologists from around the world had studied her case, trying to understand how a child exposed to such extreme contamination in utero could develop so normally. She's become inadvertently famous in medical circles, Dr. Chun explained during Emma's annual evaluation. Her resilience is helping us understand how children's bodies recover from environmental trauma. The success of the criminal prosecutions had led to copycat investigations across the country. Environmental regulators were discovering similar illegal dumping operations at facilities from California to New York, all following the pattern established at Meridian Labs. Your case broke open a national scandal, FBI agent Morrison told Jessica during a follow-up interview. We've now prosecuted similar operations in 8 states, protecting thousands of workers from toxic exposure. Jessica had completed her certification as an environmental health specialist and was working as a consultant for the EPA, helping develop new protocols for investigating workplace contamination. Her unique perspective as both a trained laboratory professional and a victim of environmental crime made her invaluable to regulators. She sees things that other investigators miss, explained Dr. Wells, the EPA administrator. Jessica understands how these operations work from the inside, and she knows what warning signs workers should watch for. The civil lawsuit settlement had provided financial security for Jessica's family, but more importantly, it had established a fund for ongoing medical monitoring of affected workers. Carmen Rodriguez, Linda Kumar, and dozens of other Meridian employees continued to receive free health care related to their toxic exposure. It's not just about the money, explained attorney Sandra Lopez. It's about ensuring that these workers get the medical care they need for the rest of their lives. David had left his engineering job to work full-time on environmental advocacy, establishing the Chun Environmental Justice Foundation with funding from the lawsuit settlement. The foundation provided legal support and medical advocacy for workers exposed to toxic chemicals. We wanted Emma to grow up seeing that her parents fight for people who can't fight for themselves, David explained during a foundation fundraiser. Her story saved lives, and we want to keep saving lives in her honor. As Jessica prepared to publish her memoir about the Meridian case, she reflected on how profoundly their lives had changed. The terrified woman who had called 911 with black amniotic fluid had become a national voice for environmental justice and worker safety. I never asked to be a hero, Jessica wrote in her book's conclusion. But sometimes ordinary people are called to do extraordinary things, and sometimes the most frightening moment of your life becomes the most important. 5 years after Emma's birth, the long-term impacts of the Meridian Labs case continued to ripple through environmental policy and public health practice. Jessica had become the director of workplace safety for the state environmental agency, overseeing a team that investigated potential toxic exposures before they could harm workers and communities. We've prevented 6 potential Meridian-style operations in the past 2 years, Jessica reported to the state legislature during budget hearings. Early intervention saves lives and saves taxpayers millions in cleanup costs. Emma had started kindergarten as a healthy, curious 5-year-old who showed no lasting effects from her traumatic prenatal experience. Her teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, noticed Emma's unusual empathy for classmates who seemed sick or worried, a trait that Jessica believed stemmed from growing up surrounded by discussions of health and healing. She wants to be a doctor when she grows up, Jessica told Dr. Chun during Emma's annual checkup. She says she wants to help people who have been poisoned like she was. The medical research inspired by Emma's case had led to breakthrough treatments for prenatal toxic exposure. Dr. Vasquez now directed a specialized clinic for pregnant women with occupational exposures, using protocols developed from Jessica's treatment experience. Emma's case taught us that early intervention and aggressive detoxification can prevent many of the long-term effects we previously thought were inevitable. Dr. Vasquez explained during a medical conference. The former Meridian Lab site had been transformed into the Emma Chun Environmental Health Center, a state-of-the-art facility providing free medical monitoring and treatment for workers exposed to industrial toxins. Jessica served on the center's board of directors, ensuring that patient care remained the primary focus. Every person who walks through these doors gets the care I wish I'd had available when I was first exposed, Jessica said during the center's 5th anniversary celebration. David's foundation had grown into a national organization providing legal support and medical advocacy for environmental crime victims. They had helped prosecute 12 additional cases of illegal waste disposal, securing justice for hundreds of affected workers and their families. The Meridian case created a template for holding corporations accountable for environmental crimes. David explained to law students during a guest lecture. Jessica's courage to speak up when something wasn't right has protected countless families from similar tragedies. Carmen Rodriguez, who had suffered kidney failure from the toxic exposure, had received a successful transplant and was now working as a patient advocate at the Emma Chan Center. Linda Kumar had gone on to have 2 healthy children after extensive medical treatment to clear toxins from her system. We're all living proof that survivors can thrive, Carmen said during a support group meeting for environmental crime victims. Jessica showed us that speaking up isn't just about seeking justice, it's about preventing others from suffering. Jessica's memoir, Black Water, A Mother's Fight for Environmental Justice, had become required reading in environmental health programs across the country. The book's proceeds funded scholarships for students studying environmental safety and public health. If our nightmare helps train the next generation of environmental protectors, Jessica wrote in a new afterword, then Emma's story will continue saving lives for decades to come. 7 years after that terrifying 911 call, Jessica stood in the delivery room of Riverside Medical Center, but this time as an expectant mother carrying her second child. The pregnancy had been carefully monitored by Dr. Vasquez and her team, with extensive testing to ensure no residual toxins threatened the developing baby. Everything looks perfect, Dr. Vasquez assured Jessica as her labor progressed. Your detoxification was complete, and this baby shows no signs of environmental stress. Emma, now 7 years old, waited excitedly in the family room with David and both sets of grandparents. She had been preparing for months to become a big sister, decorating the nursery and reading books about baby care. Is the water going to be clear this time? Emma had asked during one of their preparation talks, her innocent question revealing how much she understood about her own traumatic beginning. Yes, sweetheart, Jessica had assured her. This baby is going to have a completely normal birth. The delivery of James David Chun was everything Emma's birth hadn't been routine, peaceful, and filled with joy rather than terror. When Dr. Vasquez announced, "It's a boy," and James's healthy cry filled the room, Jessica felt a profound sense of closure. Look at that beautiful amniotic fluid, Dr. Vasquez said with a smile, knowing the significance of the moment. Clear as crystal, exactly as it should be. Jessica's recovery was swift and uncomplicated, a stark contrast to the weeks of intensive care following Emma's birth. As she held James for the first time, she reflected on the journey that had brought their family to this moment. He'll never know the fear we lived through, she told David as they watched their son's first feeding. He gets to be born into the safer world we helped create. Emma's first meeting with her baby brother was captured by photographers from Environmental Health magazine who were documenting the family's story as part of a feature on environmental crime survivors. Emma gently touched James's tiny hand and whispered, "Welcome to our family, little brother." The contrast between the 2 births became a powerful symbol for Jessica's advocacy work. She often used photos from both deliveries, the chaos and unsafe fear of Emma's emergency C-section versus the peaceful normalcy of James's birth, illustrate the importance of environmental protection. This is what victory looks like, Jessica would tell audiences during speaking engagements. One child born in crisis because of corporate greed, another born in peace because we fought for justice. James's healthy development in his first months provided additional evidence that Jessica's detoxification had been successful. Dr. Chun, who had cared for Emma as a premature infant, now monitored James as a thriving newborn. James represents hope, Dr. Chun observed during one of James's checkups. He proves that families can recover completely from environmental trauma if they get proper treatment and support. The Chun family had relocated to a rural area outside the city, choosing to raise their children away from industrial contamination. Their new home featured organic gardens, solar panels, and rainwater collection systems, a deliberate choice to live as sustainably as possible. We want our children to understand that protecting the environment isn't just about policy and regulations, David explained to a reporter. It starts with the choices we make in our daily lives. As Jessica nursed James while watching Emma play in their garden, she marveled at how much their family had grown and healed since that night of black amniotic fluid and desperate 911 calls. *10. Years after that impossible 911 call, Jessica stood before a graduating class of environmental health students at the university that now housed the Chun Institute for Environmental Justice. Emma, now 10 years old, and James, 3, sat in the front row as their mother delivered the commencement address. When I called 911 and said my amniotic fluid was black, I thought I was describing a medical impossibility. Jessica began her speech. I never imagined those words would launch a movement that would change environmental law and save countless lives. The Chun Institute had become a leading research center for occupational health and environmental justice, training a new generation of advocates and investigators. Emma often accompanied Jessica to the institute, absorbing lessons about environmental protection that would shape her own future aspirations. I want to be an environmental doctor like Mommy, Emma had announced on career day at school, presenting a poster about the importance of clean workplaces and safe communities. The ripple effects of the Meridian case continued to expand. Federal environmental crime prosecutions had increased by 300% in the decade since Jessica's case, with prosecutors using the precedent established by the Meridian convictions to pursue similar cases nationwide. The Chun case fundamentally changed how we investigate environmental crimes, explained Agent Morrison, now director of the FBI's Environmental Crime Task Force. Jessica's courage in speaking up despite the personal cost has protected thousands of workers and their families. James's healthy development provided ongoing proof that families could fully recover from environmental trauma with proper treatment and support. At 3 years old, he was curious, energetic, and showed no signs of the toxic legacy that had nearly claimed his sister's life. Both children are thriving, Dr. Chun reported during their annual family checkup. Emma continues to show no lasting effects from her prenatal exposure, and James represents the complete success of environmental remediation efforts. The former Meridian Labs contamination site had been fully remediated and converted into a public park featuring walking trails, playgrounds, and educational displays about environmental protection. Emma and James often played there, their laughter echoing where toxic waste had once threatened an entire community. It's incredible to think that this beautiful park was once a Superfund site, David mused as he pushed James on the swings while Emma climbed on playground equipment. Our children are literally playing where environmental criminals once operated. Jessica's final reflection on their journey came during the 10th anniversary commemoration of the Meridian case, standing at the podium where she had once testified about corporate environmental crimes. She looked out at an audience that included former coworkers, medical professionals, environmental advocates, and policymakers whose lives had been touched by their story. 10 years ago, I was just a lab technician who noticed something wasn't right, Jessica said in her closing remarks. Today, I stand before you as proof that ordinary people can create extraordinary change when they find the courage to speak truth to power. As the family drove home from the commemoration, Emma asked the question that had defined their entire journey. Mommy, do you think other people will be brave enough to call for help when something seems wrong? Jessica smiled, watching her children. In the rear-view mirror, Emma, reading a book about environmental science. James playing with toy trucks in the clean air of their rural community. I think your story, sweetheart, has taught a lot of people that speaking up isn't just brave, it's necessary. And sometimes the most frightening phone call becomes the most important one you'll ever make. The black water that had once threatened to destroy their family had instead become the catalyst for protecting countless others, proving that even in the darkest moments, hope and justice can emerge to light the way forward.